Welcome everyone again to the 2023 Literary Web3 Conference. My name is Bella Irons. I am the host and the founder of the Academic Web3 Conference, and we have started curating specialty events and conferences, and the literary one is our first. But we are at the end of our conference and our final panel, which is incredibly important, with the ownership economy and reclaiming authorship and artistry for students and, artists and authors and writers and everybody that is coming into this space. So I have the pleasure of being able to host this panel with two wonderful human beings that I've just been so grateful to have met in this space as well. Amyli McDaniel is the CEO of MINTangible, and Joss Lake is a professor of English at Columbia University. And so I will let you guys introduce yourself and talk about how you are helping with Web3 industry and with authorship and artistry and or education in this area, because this is an important aspect of bringing people into Web3 and the education of people. So go ahead.
So can you guys hear me okay? First of all, I'm going to apologize. For some reason, my webcam is not getting to the right webcam, so I'm going to be looking at this angle. I'm not exactly sure how to fix that. But my name is Amyli McDaniel, and I'm the CEO of a Web3 company called MINTangible. And the whole mission behind MINTangible is to champion the rights of artists and creators in Web3 by unlocking sort of this full potential of decentralized digital ownership and rights. And I'm an intellectual property lawyer by training, but I've spent most of my career really on the forefront of innovation when it comes to the licensing of intellectual property in the digital world. So for example, I was the first, I worked on the first ebook, which is I'm sure near and dear to folks here, the first ebook reader for the iPhone, really trying to help publishers distribute their books on ebooks at a time when no one knew what an ebook was. And our goal was to sort of empower authors. As you guys know, through the Web 1 and Web 2, things ended up becoming more centralized. And so I'm super excited about Web3 as finally the technology and the ethos and the culture and the innovation to create a more democratized and inclusive environment for creators, including publishers, to finally participate in a meaningful way. And so that's my background.
Hi, I'm Joss. So I teach creative writing at Columbia. I'm also a novelist and published my debut novel, Future Feeling, with Soft Skull Press in 2021. And I'm relatively new to the space of Web3 and VR and AR, but it's something that I recently received a grant through Columbia and their Emerging Technologies Consortium to experiment with implementing VR into like a literary classroom and see what happens, especially in, when teaching creative writing that involves world building, including sci-fi and fantasy. And so it's been really wonderful to see the different ways that we can approach education and creation, and kind of get outside of this very sort of traditional kind of gatekeeping model where, publishers are sort of, you kind of have to pass through so many different barriers to access readers. And I think something that is really inspiring to my students and that relates to these questions of ownership are that there are maybe other ways to reach readers, to reach an audience that don't require moving through these, again, like very traditional avenues, because something that comes up a lot in publishing is it's a very kind of risk-averse business. So people basically pitch and sell books by comparing them to other books that have done well. So if you have a work and there's not a great like comp title for it, it's going to be very hard to get anyone interested. And so the thing that happens because of that process is that no one really wants to like take a risk if it's sort of unknown territory. And so I do think something that really excites me about Web3 is that there can be these sort of new and evolving ways for artists and students to share work that, again, kind of maybe can circumvent some of the more traditional gatekeepers. So yeah, very happy to be here.
Thank you to you both. I mean, each panel has offered so much interwoven, dialogue and experience. But I'm really excited about what both of you are bringing to this table about ownership, because MINTangible is doing some amazing things for being able to help artists, move forward with digital assets and such. So I really, would like to open up this conversation by talking about, some of the harder topics that maybe authors and artists don't always understand, because Web3 is a very big kind of, new world for people to merge onto a speeding highway. And one of the aspects of artistry that is not always discussed is the legal implications of things. But how do you help other people understand the opportunities with digital assets, but also do things to be able to protect them moving forward, in a new economy like ownership. So can you expand a little bit more about how MINTangible is bringing these new opportunities to authors and artists?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the crux of all of this is that all of us are creators, right? So we're all artists, and we all have talents that we, want to bring to the world to benefit ourselves, to benefit our communities, and hopefully to benefit the world. And that, if you kind of look at intellectual property at its core, that was the whole purpose of the copyright laws, was to provide an economic incentive for people to use their brain to create something creative, or to create something intellectual, or to solve problems, and to have an ability to monetize that through intellectual property ownership, which gives you exclusive rights to what you are creating in the non-tangible world. The problem is, in the real world, it's very expensive, it's very complex, and it's very time consuming to take something creative and to distribute it to the world, and to do it in the way that you can actually make a living off of it. And so while the laws are there, and the whole intention is to do what every creator wants to do, which is to rely on something unique that they have that they can bring, and use that to actually make a living, it's never really been possible other than for the largest corporations. So what I think Web3 offers, and really what made me want to create what we do to help support that, is the ability for anybody to be Disney now, or anybody to be Netflix. So because all of a sudden, if you can take technology, and if you could take community, and the magic word here is ownership to me, because when you all of a sudden can give a community an economic incentive, a social incentive, and an emotional incentive, and even a cultural incentive to engage with you, to learn about you, and to help co-create with you, that creates all of a sudden a much more effective flywheel that doesn't cost a lot. So that's what I believe Web3 does, because it's all based on this real technical technology called a non-fungible token and a smart contract. But what it does from a realistic perspective is it creates the ability to own something on the internet and control that. And so when I thought about it, I thought what MINTangible really needed to do was to turn this token and all this technology into a way to create a vehicle where a creator can finally set something up with their works where they get to control it. And so they can use this vehicle now. I think other people said this in the earlier versions. They can use the vehicle to execute on their vision, right? Without having gatekeepers and other people telling them what to do. This vehicle also becomes a much more effective way to economically pay a creator. And this concept of sort of ongoing royalties. So now a creator doesn't just control, but they can also thrive. And then last but not least, it gives a way for creators to give their community or their supporters or their fans incentives, whether it be an economic incentive or a community incentive or, you know, an ability to vote on something. And once you give your community an incentive, then, and you're attracting the right people into your community, you've created this amazing flywheel now where you guys are working together to bring something quite amazing to the world. And it could be a story, it could be a character, it could be, you know, art, it could be a patent, it could be a software product, you know, tons of different things. Anybody has something that now they can sort of use this vehicle in Web3 to do that. And so I thought about that, and then I looked at the technology and realized it doesn't quite do that. It needs infrastructure. Infrastructure to be able to set up these assets as safe ones, so trusted ones, as transparent ones, so ones that immediately anyone looking at it can know exactly what rights go and don't go with the NFT. And then also to be assets that protect the IP of the creator, that give legally sound, you know, royalty entitlements, to sort of have this legal soundness to them. And that's really supportive of the entire tokenized asset economy. We really need rights infrastructure so that every tokenized asset can be something that can hold sustainable value as an asset. So MINTangible, and you know, our big mission is to build out that infrastructure. And we've come to the market with a product that simply, it digitally binds, displays, and certifies intellectual property and royalty rights directly to NFTs. We're also creating a series of open source license templates because we realize a lot of creators, they kind of know what they want, they have a vision, but they don't know how that translates to a set of intellectual property rights that support that vision. So coming from the open source world, I'm really trying to work in different industries, focused on, in our first phase, on digital collectibles on one hand, and doing some music use cases. We did do a literary, we did work with Greg, who was on here earlier. I don't know if he's still here at Cryptoversal, who's doing some crazy great innovation in the literary space with co-creation of stories, and he has got characters and things like that. But really wanting to work with folks in different categories that want to innovate and come up with use cases so that everybody can, benefit from this moving forward. So what we do is we bring a legally sound infrastructure that supports a business use case. And our whole goal is for authors and creators to eventually be able to focus on their work, their talent, who they want to collaborate with, what community they want to attract, and how they want to incentivize them, and have the NFT itself be a trusted and easy to use vehicle to set up so that they can focus on what they care about the most.
That is so important. These infrastructures I brought up before, that, evolutionary theories, even though there's a variety of them in which evolution, takes place, I can see both from a linguistic and also from a technological, perspective that there's only a certain amount of the assimilation that will come through from, a great expanse of innovation. And because we already do have programs and systems in place that are very ingrained in a lot of our cultures, like law, like education, it's really important to be able to see, how these kind of innovations can also help bridge where people already are, where they're already operating within the legal, parameters of, intellectual property, where artists and authors and publishers have already been operating and understanding the uses of, but now being given this additional opportunity for that. So thank you so much for going more in depth into it, because I want to make sure that people understand that these tools are out there and they're for us to be able to start engaging as authors, as artists, so that we can, extend digital assets and NFTs into these bridges of what, will be the mass adoption, moving forward for the preponderance of the rest of society that isn't in this, subset right now. But because I want to shift from law to education, because Professor Lake, one of the unique qualities that you're bringing to this conference and that I'm a part of is more of what within Web3 is considered the metaverse, or virtual reality, VR, alternative reality, AR, there's MR, and you have not only, are not only an instructor, professor within English and creative writing, but now you applied and received this grant to extend this expression of, writing and literature into your courses and with students in this metaverse, area of Web3. And because education is such, again, another, centralized but still very substantial aspect of society, did you guys have the conversations? Were students wanting to understand, how do they monetize digital assets? How do they engage creating, their artistry and their literature in VR? And then where could it go from there? Do you want to talk about, what you guys experienced?
Sure. So, I mean, it's an interesting question in academic institutions where creative writing is taught. Basically, in my experience, the the subject of monetization of more of the kind of finer points of publishing, it's kind of still a real taboo. Like, people don't really talk about, what do you expect when you sign a book contract, or like what, because I think people have such varied experiences, like coming out of an MFA program. But I think also there's this real kind of sense that, in an academic space, in a sort of creative institutional space, like we don't need to address money. That's like not necessary. It's not appropriate. Which I think does a real disservice to students, who are trying to figure out their publishing careers, and who at least need a very grounded expectation, of what they might encounter after they finish a certain program. So in terms of talking about the question of monetization in our creative writing classrooms, where students are working in platforms like Sculptor VR, Mozilla Hub, some Unity, some Spatial. The question of monetization hasn't really arisen, at least in a larger setting. But I do think that, I think these questions of ownership, while they are rather like divorced from an institutional academic setting, I think they're really important. And I think there's a way that these questions kind of get sort of fragmented and parceled out. So like, for instance, if you have a literary agent, it's like, okay, they deal with the, like my agent will deal with the contracts, the legal, the rights, the actual negotiations, all of the sort of fine print, like he does. So I don't think about it. But I do think that in these sort of emerging fields, that I think authors would be more empowered if we had a better understanding of the ways that we could, both how these systems operate, and also if there are ways to, work through like questions of monetization that don't require sort of outsourcing to these other kind of like experts. And I will say, I mean, this is not particularly Web3, but one thing that I see a lot of, and I think has been really helpful for certain writers, is like Substack subscription. So a lot of writers are starting to, because, I mean, some writers send out newsletters and there's no monetization, but I think a lot, especially, writers who have a fair amount of followers, have found that if they're going to be constantly, generating this content, that they're, thinking through really, really thoughtfully, then why not have, like paid subscribers who have access to certain elements and there's more, there can be this sort of community feel around it, and different like incentives for people to like join different types of online events. So I mean, that's like the very lo-fi thing that I am seeing a lot in the literary sphere, is at least writers, trying to engage directly with their audience in certain ways versus feeling like we have to like consult this outside publishing expert. We are only responsible for the creation, and then someone else is responsible for the sort of distribution. So I think these are great questions. I think, again, in terms of like academic institutions, there's a real like sort of silo around, there's a real taboo around talking about money in general.
It's important to bring out any, of these issues. Thank you. Because as an ed tech consultant for over a decade, I know, and also, as a graduate student, I'm aware of my experiences on both sides, working with the division chairs and working with the different departments. And so I concur with what you're talking about, that there's certain parts of education that are not necessarily built into courses, but last year when we held the Academic Web3 Conference, we had a couple of professors that have been creating courses for over a year and a half now, and teaching them at universities in the United States that do have elements of monetization or ownership within the courses, because Web3 inherently is a very new technology iteration, in that it incorporates not only a lot of different dimensions to it. It's not just blockchain and digital assets, but it includes AI, and it includes metaverse or AR or VR. It's a very broad, vessel for the like new emerging technology, to say like Web3. But even within that, it has a lot of very substantial elements to people's individual and social lives, in that it's creating decentralized models from, or experimenting with, getting out of centralized systems, which we're starting to really experience in multiple industries, are not sustainable, as we grow and innovate, in different ways. But also the monetization aspect of things, and finances hits people very closely in a lot of regards, culturally, socially, individually, familial systems. And so, not just having like a very large technology umbrella in which multiple avenues, of participation are happening, but also adding, deconstructing centralized systems and a new monetary system on top of that as possibilities, is a large, piece for people to chew on and educate towards. And so that kind of leads me to, we've been talking about like communities and how it's so important in Web3, to, find your community, to just get involved and start reaching out to people, and how people in Web3 predominantly are just really eager to help other people understand what's going on, and who's out there and available to talk to and collaborate with. But also, this disruptive feature of Web3 being this great innovative, opportunity in a lot of ways. And what you were both kind of commenting about, it feels like society is already really starting to look at this ownership, not just from the IP models and law that we have now, but, the influencing industry that has been, prominent for the last at least decade. Now there's like de-influencing happening. People are trying to advocate, the content creators are trying to advocate for themselves, the scholars are trying to advocate for themselves and find these new opportunities for them to connect with others, to collaborate, to build their story, their brand, and have this ownership in it. So, where could, like, students if we're going to integrate the information, into more courses for students to know, or, what would be like a first step for them to start investigating, oh, I'm a content creator. What is this that people are talking about with Web3? How can I have ownership? What does that look like, in your mind, Emily?
Yeah, sure. So the community element of Web3 for me is probably the strongest component of Web3, even more so than an economic component, because there's this sort of ability now for groups as small as 2 or 3, right, to be motivated around joint ownership of something, right? If you look at, and so I think, I actually was just speaking to somebody this morning that's starting the blockchain education club, and hopefully moving into curriculum and Web3 for a large university here in Virginia. I would strongly suggest, you can't describe the magic of community in Web3. You can only, you can't describe it in words. You have to experience it. And so, and I've experienced it by, like an example would be, I know there was somebody here earlier. I was, the mentor of the World of Women Web3 community from the beginning. And there's a magic within that community that when you own a component of it by having an NFT, that you start to feel that energy. You start to see the collaborations happen. You start to see the co-creation of ideas and what becomes important, and people's voices kind of coming out in community. So I guess what I would say is that the best way to teach the community element of Web3 and what it can do for yourself, whether it be, emotionally or economically or otherwise, is to actually participate in one. And so what I would suggest with universities and even, secondary high schools and things like that is to actually create a learning by doing. Because another great thing is you can, it's experimenting with these new concepts, this convergence of creativity, entrepreneurship, and technology that, and using these components to around a niche of shared interest on something. So I do think that by doing, and I'm excited to sort of see some of these curriculums coming together. Even the local university here is doing amazing things with getting students not just learning about the future of Web3, but also participating in it and experimenting in it within their classes, so that by the time they graduate, they kind of, experientially have educated themselves on, where they might be able to plug into it. So I just think that the community piece is best learned by jumping in and participating, and that universities can do their part in almost any department or any area in the university to sort of, create a Web3 based initiative, even if it's an experiment and, or even if it's as part of a curriculum, to sort of see these different components and how they're coming together and how different, innovation and use cases are coming as a way to educate.
Yeah, I will open it up for anybody in education, academia, K through 12, so Academic Web3 Conference would love to help create DAOs, help create decentralized constructs for use cases on campuses, to help, provide a platform and a continual space for people to have conversations in these educational environments, because it is a very new kind of model to try to approach and educate towards, and not new in a way too. This is community. This is engaging with other humans. This is, integrating technology layers and innovations in technology to do what it is that we naturally have been evolved to do, which is connect with each other, So it's wonderful I'll open it up for anybody to reach out to us, to talk about this and continue these conversations. This is what we've put the conference together for. I do have a question for Professor Lake. With your experience coming into the conference and being a little bit different than, a lot of the NFTs and digital assets that we've been talking about, but more in the metaverse and VR. Where did you find with your course, the innovations or the sense of community? Did you feel, was there any difference between how the courses were approached before with the students and what they found in VR, and hearing and understanding that, this aspect of connecting with people is so important. And that's always a conversation that people are having with me, while I'm building out my metaverse modality for my arts-based research dissertation. How did you see, a sense of community coming about within VR? Because that's a very, distinct, avenue of participation in Web3.
Yeah, it's such a good question. I mean, I feel like my classes where I've implemented VR, there's more of just like a looseness to them and a sense of collaboration versus sometimes in my sort of just writing-based classes, there's a lot more, I think students are putting a lot more pressure on themselves. There's more tension, there's more sort of tentativeness. And I think something that's so helpful about VR in spaces where there's no expectation that students would have been engaging in these technologies like prior, is that we all are coming to it as sort of amateurs, which like ideally we could all adopt like an amateur mindset in everything that we do because we're always just learning things. But sometimes students, whether they're undergrad or grad students, put really high expectations on themselves, like the further they go along in a course. And so there can be this real sort of this tension or sense of even like competition. Whereas as we're introducing VR, there's this like, I mean, from the moment we're like handing out the headsets, there's this real like joy and just like, excitement, enthusiasm, and like a wanting to show each other, the work as it's going. So it's not like, oh, I'm going to write this short story, I'm going to perfect it over a month, and maybe then I'll still feel really unsure about it. But when they're building in VR, they're like, oh my gosh, like you have to see what I just added. And so there's this real playfulness and curiosity that's really amazing to see, and I feel like should be a real component of any creative class. But again, there are these certain institutional structures that kind of can, be a counterbalance against that. And I do feel like something that's so exciting about working in these platforms with VR is that, creating the work that they're building is like step one, and then step two and beyond is like actually inviting people into the space, sharing it. And so I think there's a real, I think there's, I would argue, greater accessibility in a lot of ways in terms of creating in VR and being able to invite people into a space than necessarily like reading, having like a formal reading where you're like in class reading from, your screen or a piece of paper. It's like a very kind of traditional, rigid format, and it can be hard for people to access each other's creative work, just like hearing piece after piece after piece. Whereas if you enter into a space, I think because we're such visual beings, if you can enter into someone's space, you kind of feel, I think, a greater sense of connectivity. And it's a way to further engage people in the writing. It's not that it's going to supersede the writing, at least in my courses. But I do see like a really marked difference between classes where we're using VR and classes where we're not.
Thank you for that. Again, I concur. Being a part of the World Metaverse Council, it's not just students, it's adults all around the world that are feeling, and I felt this even buying Bitcoin in 2013 or becoming a part of the DeFi industry in 2019. It seems like every new or rising iteration within Web3 is this continual momentum and this foundational quality of, you know, idea generation and collaboration and community and, you know, open source, you know, is another big avenue that you had brought up earlier that I, you know, back and support with my projects as well. So thank you for bringing that up, Professor Lake, because you know, I feel and see the same thing, that it just feels so much more playful. It feels so much more open and inviting in general for people to participate with. And, you know, that's like a wonderful template and vessel for people to step into. It's just that there's a lot around it, right? And that educational component, again, is how do you connect with all of the different moving pieces and, you know, people that have been in this already for years. You know, we're even having a hard time keeping up sometimes. I mean, let alone just AI innovation in the last couple of months for the majority of humanity. You know, and that we have to like actually ask for it to stop so that we can keep up. And we're in this industry, you know, it's just, it's a lot, you know, for people to engage with. But it's also so much opportunity. And what you marked about your courses is exactly what we've been hearing, you know, with panelists all during the conference, that, you know, there's just this amazing sense of opportunity that people are stepping into. And it's kind of like a breath of fresh air from all of these, you know, systems that necessarily haven't been, you know, working for people for a long time in different areas. So I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Amyli.
Well, I would just say that I feel the overwhelm too, because there's so much opportunity and so many different topics that when you're trying to learn about this space and how or where you can best participate, it does get quite overwhelming. So I tend to try to create frameworks around the different components. And, you know, when I'm talking to artists, I mean, and again, me and my team, we're just learning as well. So we're all in this together. But we've come up with sort of a framework about learning for an artist you know, think about what is the vision that you want for your work, right? Like, which is, whether it be in Web3 or Web2 or offline, everybody sort of has a vision for, you know, where they see their works being consumed, distributed, maybe, you know, developed in the world. And then and I call that your vision, right? They come up with sort of this vision. But in Web3, what's really important and what really makes this vision now a more reasonable reality for many artists is that there is a community that you can now more easily reach out to and grow. So part of that vision should be, what do you want to grant to your community, and what type of community members do you want to bring? And so if I think about a literary use case, and you know, I was like, some folks want to just distribute their stories so that people can consume them. And then, you know, you find out what are the types of what are the types of readers that would you know, and that would be your community. And then you can use NFTs actually to engage them in the same way you would do it in Web2, but in a much more efficient way. Other literary folks are like, I know folks are saying, look, I want to create a comic book character, and I want to bring folks in that are going to help co-create a series. Or, you know, and so I think it's very important to first think about what is the vision you want and how do you want your community members to participate, and then think about how you can incentivize them. And it's only when you get to that piece that you start to think about, okay, what is, in my world, what is the IP strategy? What are the rights that I want to grant? What are the rights that I want myself or my company to keep? And you create an IP strategy around that. And it's only when you have your vision and your IP strategy that you've sort of translated into, okay, how do I execute this on the blockchain, right? And how do I create these assets that will get distributed to community members that, you know, make it very clear that, you know, reflect sort of what that IP strategy and that NFT vision is. So I tend to think when it comes to education, it's better to break things down in steps, and then even within each of those, like blocks. And we're actually launching an education community called the IP Guardians, specifically to sort of help artists think about the IP strategy piece of it, and do it in a way that is not overwhelming, that actually teaches them how they can actually use this and practically apply it, you know, for their own specific works.
That is amazing. Is that going to be open source so that all of the college professors can bring that into their syllabus?
For sure. It is definitely going to be, I'm not calling it, I'm calling it more of a guild, because we want all the NFT communities and anybody that's building in the space to be a part of the guild. And we want, and it's also, you know, it's community driven. So folks that want to, you know, we really want to bring the people that share this mission and passion, and that want to be able to teach this in a way that is usable and practical, because it's really, at least on the IP side, you know, lawyers speaking legal speak to creators has never worked, right? And now when artists need to be entrepreneurs, because they need to know what is they need to make sure that they're, you know, distributing their vision in a way that's, you know, with integrity to themselves. They have to have some of these basic building blocks to make it successful. And so we want to really be able to like move more inside the creator economy and the creative economy and teach from the inside, so that, you know, as opposed to trying to require people to, you know, have legal degrees or, you know, learn like concepts that are quite complex. So
yeah, the ownership economy. I mean, this is putting the responsibility back. Decentralized concepts is, you know, at kind of the heart of Web3. It's really carried forward in a lot of the intention for a lot of the communities and companies. But deconstructing centralized systems means that authority, that responsibility is coming back into the creators, into the scholars. Absolutely. And so building that educational, you know, reconstruct of, no, you're not just going to pay your $25 monthly bank fee and they're going to take care of all of your, you know, financial aspects. You actually are owning your keys, owning your wallet, and have these mechanisms out there creating, you know, a monetization avenue for you. And, you know, just it's a really big, you know, new, you know, thing to bite off and chew. So that's a wonderful addition. I mean, thank you for adding that you're bringing education into this, because it is such a big part of it. And I have a question for you both, because we're talking about ownership. And one of the areas that, you know, as a poet and an author, if I wouldn't have had like my day job, you know, it makes it hard for, and has in the past, for artists or content creators to have a living based off of what they're creating, right, in the world. And the notion of the starving artist has perpetuated throughout many societies for a long time. And I'm interested in both of your ideas about, you know, is this the opportunity? Because I see Web3 as a second renaissance. There's so many correlations to the other first renaissance, and one of them being decentralized systems like city-states, the rise of artists, and a new monetization system, where in the first one, the feudal systems turned into the banking institutions, and those bankers started supporting the artists, which is very similar to what has been happening today. But I'd be really interested in both your ideas of, are we in, you know, this period of being able to possibly rid society of this notion of a starving artist or a creator or a scholar by, you know, enacting and supporting and, you know, furthering these new decentralized constructs for people?
I can answer. Joss, do you want to go first, or do you?
Either way.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So I very deeply in my heart believe that this is the opportunity for the starving artist to not be starving anymore. And so much so that I've devoted, you know, the last 2.5 years to figuring out how Web3, which is really the next stage of the internet, doesn't get taken over by centralized platforms again. But having said that, it's generational that artists have been so disempowered. So the concept you mentioned about it's scary now, because with great opportunity comes great responsibility. And for any of us that have gone through on the DeFi side, you're right, and all of a sudden have our own money where we control our keys, and all of a sudden, oh my gosh, what if I forget my 12 seed phrase? It's a very scary concept. So we take control of our destiny, or our money, or our IP, or our vision, but it's now is 100% your control. So you have to understand, how do you do that safely? How do you do that, but what with protecting your IP? How do you ensure your royalties are done? How do you take care of your community? And so I think that there is a big jump for artists to kind of get beyond the disempowerment to an empowerment state. But I also realize how scary that is, because it's never been such a realistic opportunity for so many artists before. But I do think that the support.
Great. In terms of taking a more kind of holistic approach to their careers, and not only focusing on the creation, but also on the sort of dissemination. Which at a moment when artists, face so much precarity, are facing precarity while also trying to figure out how to transition into a new way of operating, I do think that even calls for greater, then artists need even more resources to be able to take the time to investigate and educate themselves. So I do feel artistic community is so important, and for people to be able to sort of skill share, and for us, and for there to be a kind of de-education process, because a lot of us were trained in systems where it's look to these academic institutions, look to the publishing world, for your future, for your economic viability. And so I think there has to be sort of trust in this alternative model, and a lot of support. But I do think it's a very exciting moment.
Agreed. And that's why I've been so impassioned to curate these conferences to bring more of that. But I love what MINTangible is talking about offering too with this education, because this is one space, as a creator, I had to learn just through others, what we're talking about with community, about how do I sell my work, even traditionally, right? And then, platforms came online like Amazon and self-publishing, that have continually been trying to, create an evolutionary, cycle for people. But at some point, these centralized systems, we need to be able to play with breaking and de-educating what we've already learned, for that innovation to be able to come through, and for greater expression of person and work, to expand, into history. And so, I believe that we're at that crossroads right now too, which is so hopeful. And my entire career has been leading to this moment, it seems like, to help with this effort. We're coming up to the end of the hour and the end of the conference, actually. It just flew by today. I'm glad that we're recording this so that we can get this out and the recordings to people as quickly as we can. But I wanted to make sure that if anybody in the audience wants to ask questions, add to the conversation about ownership, if there's anything in particular that you found challenging, or that you would like, more clarity on, please, do so now, while we have the last couple of minutes. And I'm so grateful for both of you to be here, because it's so wonderful to have a variety of voices coming in, where the new students, the new creators, and the opportunities are there. And also, what are the structures that have been in place, and how can those, be expanded for their understanding? What is this new model for MINTangible, if you don't mind, going into it a little bit more? Is it something that people can reach out to you now and ask for? Is there going to be a launch about the education or the guild?
Yeah. So let me first talk about MINTangible, because we just launched our solution in February. And our solution binds the intellectual property, royalty, and any other terms to NFTs. We are very mission-based about championing creator rights and education. So the first thing I would like to put out there is, if there's anybody that is at the point of either having NFTs in the marketplace or launching, reach out to me. We'll certify and bind your IP terms on your first collection for free. We'll walk you through the process. We'll, sit through a half-hour IP strategy session with you to link your vision to your strategy to the NFT structure. Our whole goal is to make sure, educate artists enough so that they join in on this movement to say, look, we need NFTs to be transparent, trusted, and sustainable assets. And we're going to insist that our NFTs that we're bringing out do that, because it's only when the creators, participate in insisting that NFTs, not just for themselves but for their collectors, are the type of assets that make sense to accomplish on Web3. And a lot of that is education. Creators are putting their works on NFTs right now and not doing anything else, and that's creating so much risk to them and so much risk of loss of trust to their community. So we're on a mission to fix that. We will, work with any artist that it has a reputable project and help them sort of onboard in with their first project. Secondly, we do have IP Guardians. It's not officially launched yet. We are going to be at NFT NYC next week. I am speaking on transformative licensing up there. We'll introduce the community, but if anybody wants to sort of join us, soon there will be an email sign up on the ipguardians.io site. But that's all going to be an open community, really focused on making IP a superpower for creators.
Awesome. There's a lot that we're kind of like alpha dropping this today for NFT and next week. So yeah, you're welcome. We'll get these out before the conference so people know what to expect and what panels to go to there. That's for sure. But what a generous offer. I mean, anybody and everybody that's involved with NFTs, definitely reach out. Is there a particular, you have the emails on the website and you have a Twitter profile. I believe you have LinkedIn.
Yeah. Yes, so our Twitter profile is MINTangible_IO, and mine is Amyli McDaniel. I also, anybody that I can help out in terms of any type of feedback or input or answer any questions related to intellectual property or licensing strategies in Web3, my DMs are always open. And then, like I said, we are offering this special offers as part of NFT NYC. As the CEO, I'm willing to do it as long as I can and my team can sustain, support. So I know there'll be some limitations. We can't do every blockchain right now, but if you're launching on a blockchain that we don't support, I'll definitely keep your name for when we do. So really want to, authentically help in any way, as we're coming to the market, and you guys help us as well, because the more we can show real use cases that find it important to set up NFTs as proper assets and proper IP vehicles, the better it is for the whole industry.
Yeah, that is very generous of you and MINTangible and your team's time. So as a tech founder, like for that kind of offering, everybody that's hearing this, try to take advantage of that, because I mean, you guys are going to be so busy with everything that's coming in, because there's so many different people producing so many different types of digital assets now. But also, Professor Lake, this education curriculum, what do you think about, this and the concept of it for any of your VR classes or any of the kind of Web3 constructs moving forward? Is this something, where the institutes and the universities, you can see this, possibly being another asset, for people to understand about, even if it's not offered, within the traditional curriculum?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've been thinking about sort of ways to expand the VR curriculum kind of outside of the sort of creative writing course, because that's every semester I can't always teach a class that does involve VR. And I think I mean, there are so many other ways to like have workshops, to bring experts in, and to kind of build out through the Emerging Technology Consortium at Columbia. I think there are just ways that, yeah, that we can really like educate and build community that don't have to strictly fall within the realm of like an academic course. And I think there are ways that it sort of necessarily is going to involve more like I think having more interdisciplinary conversations and sort of creating more of a coalition would be way better and way better suited to Web3 than trying to like do this work kind of on my own in the creative writing department, where people are really just, they don't really know what I'm talking about. So yeah, I think there's a lot of work to be done within an institution, and I think it needs to look collaborative and it needs to look interdisciplinary, and it doesn't simply have to fall within the purview of an academic course. But I think there is, I think there is a lot of excitement around the Emerging Technologies Consortium, and I think that, yeah, I'm excited to keep working on this.
Well, this is a perfect example of how Web3 actually works, right? I'm all in for a coalition. Like, this is why I've been forming these conferences, so that academia could really start engaging in what is going on out there, and maybe be able to merge onto this moving freeway a little bit easier, especially with new innovative, systems of deconstructing, centralized constructs and playing with them and having new use cases, especially students and innovators and people coming to the table, with all sorts of ideas. This is a space, this is a palette for people to be able to engage that from a variety of different ways. So it is now noon Pacific Standard Time. We are at the hour. We're at the end of the Literary Web3 Conference. I am just so elated and so like full of everybody today and for everybody coming here. And thank you to MINTangible and Amyli, like everything in your generous offer, like really people to consider that, because it's so important to understand what each person is doing out there. And it was important for us to curate, being able to bring these different ideas and different experiences to the table. And for Professor Lake and what you're doing, bringing this into education and all these new ideas and opportunities for people, let's build the coalition. Thank you to both of you today and to everybody participating in the conference. I am very, very deeply humbled and grateful.
Thank you, Bella. It's a great conference.
Yeah, thank you.
And that is going to wrap up the 2023 Literary Web3 Conference. So yeah, I see in the chat some alpha dropping all day, and we're going to try and get these videos out as quickly as we can and help people, bring more voices and more experience to the table. And thank you all to the hosts and the panelists today. Like I said, this is a joint effort. Web3 is definitely about, bootstrapping and bringing everybody to the table, and community is just such a, interwoven thread through each one of these panels and the experiences, and definitely as a foundation of Web3. So I'm so excited for where Literary Web3 is going. And let's help merge onto this freeway and go into the second renaissance together. So thank you everybody for being here, and enjoy the rest of your day.